Hello again, everyone. In this video, we're going to look at something that's part of every Oracle database. It's called PL/SQL. And PL/SQL is a programming language that's part of every Oracle database, and it gives you the ability to write programs to do sophisticated things inside of an Oracle database. And this video is really going to be focusing on why. Why does PL/SQL even exist? PL/SQL exists to give you a programmatic language and the ability to do conditional processing as part of your SQL statements. The SQL standard itself is really good for working with individual statements, but for working with groups of data where you want to do different things to the data depending on the different values, it can really be a challenge if you're just going to use the SQL standard language to do that. So let's take a look at an example of that. Let's say I have inside my company, I'm going to go through and I'm going to say that everybody who's in Department 10, everybody who's there, they get a 5% raise. Writing a SQL statement to reflect that is relatively easy, right? You can do something like this. You can say update employee, and this is just pseudocode, we don't actually have these tables available to us. But let's say we're going to update employee, we're going to set salary equal to existing salary times 1.1, where DEPT equals 10. Relatively simple SQL statement, right? This will give us exactly what we want to do. It'll find everybody who's in Department 10 inside my organization, and it'll increase their salary by their existing salary plus 10%. Real simple. Most business logic inside of an organization is nowhere near this simple. Usually you have to do much more sophisticated processing on your data on a regular basis, and SQL unfortunately falls a little bit short in doing those types of things. So let's say I have the second scenario. So I have the scenario where I say I want to give my employees raises. If they're in Department 10, then they're going to get a 5% raise. Oh, I did 5% there. It should have been 10%. Sorry, just realized that. They get a 10% raise. Sorry about that. If they're Department 10, they're going to get a 5% raise. If they're Department 20, they're going to get a 10% raise. And if they're Department 30, they're going to get a 15% raise. But Department 30 is my sales department, so I want to say the top 5% of my sales department. So the top 5% where department equals 30. I really want to give those guys a 20% raise because top 5% of sales guys in my organization, want to reward them, want to keep them happy. Writing an update statement to reflect this is a heck of a lot more complicated. You could do it. You could go through and write an update statement that has all of these different types of pieces in it, but it really gets to be a challenge in a really short period of time. With PL/SQL, I have a lot more flexibility into saying, okay, I want to query all my employees, and then based on these different criteria, I want to go through and apply different things to the database. So one of the things that the standard SQL language doesn't have that PL/SQL does have is stuff like while loops, for loops, variables. Right, variables where I can hold different pieces of information. So an example here might be I might run this while loop and then have different if statements. I have if-then statements also. Can't forget about those. I might run through all my employees. I might loop through all my employees, and if the department equals 10, then apply something there. If the department equals 20, apply something there. If the department equals 30, then I have to do another query where I have to say, okay, is this person part of my top 5% of my sales force? If they are, then I want to increase their salary by 20%. Otherwise, I want to increase it by 15%. If I try to do this in a standard SQL statement, that would be really tough to do. You probably could do it if you worked hard enough at it, but it makes a lot more sense to go through and use a programming language like PL SQL to go through and do those types of things. Another really important piece of PL SQL and why it exists is, let's say I go through all of this work and I create this update statement that has all of these funky different things on it, and I execute it and it works great and everything like that. Well, once I execute that statement, it's gone. Unless I've saved it off in some file. Let's say I've created a text file locally on my machine. That update statement, for all intents and purposes, is gone. So if I want to run that statement a second time, I have to go through and I have to reconstruct the statement, or I have to pull it out of this text file that I've created locally on my system, rerun the statement. If I've stored it inside the database inside of a PL SQL statement or a PL SQL block, I can actually store it inside the database and reuse it over and over again and do these sophisticated things to it over and over again. Another thing is something called a parameter. I don't have the ability to pass in a parameter. I can use a bind variable as part of my SQL statement here, but I don't have the ability to pass in any kind of parameters to say, okay, well, maybe I just want to do this for a particular department. I don't want to hard code a 10 here or a 20 or something like that. I want to have the ability to go in there and pass in different values. I could use a bind variable that's part of, let's say, a form or some other application. But if I've stored it inside of a PL SQL block inside my database, I have the ability to define parameters, and then I can call this uh, block of code, passing it different values depending on what I'm trying to do at any particular point in time. So PL SQL exists for a whole bunch of different reasons. It gives us a programmatic construct so that we can do conditional processing inside of our database. We have while loops, for loops. We have the ability to have variables that are part of whatever code that we're trying to execute inside of our database. We have if-then functionality, which we don't really have inside of SQL. We have limited functionality like case statements and decode statements that can do some of those things for us, but really basic. We can do really sophisticated processing with this. And we also have the ability to use parameters inside of our PL SQL code. So in the upcoming videos, all of these things are going to be a lot more clear. But this video is really intended to give an indication of why PL SQL exists and some of the really cool things that you can do with it inside your database.